everyone, and welcome to Untamed Unfiltered. I'm Amanda Nicholson.
And I am Aaron Provencio, and today we are joined by the Center's Outreach Coordinator, Alex Waring. What's up,
Hey
Alex?
guys, thanks so much for inviting me to be a guest. I'm excited.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today.
I've got my coffee mug. I've watched
Good.
all the other ones, so I know how to fit in.
It makes people very jealous, you know? I didn't anticipate that. I should have, but for those of you watching, if you're like, hey, is that for sale in the Wildlife Center's online shop? It is not. They were special gifts to us for our Christmas party, for our holiday party at the end of last year. So, whole special thing for the staff.
I barely even got mine.
Exactly. Well, thanks for joining us today, Alex. So today we're talking about critters don't need litter and delving into that topic, which I feel like is a pretty straightforward issue. We generally know that litter's not a good thing and we should not be doing that. But I think there are a lot of things to talk about. And we certainly know that at our hospital, we do see a number of patients coming in throughout the year that are due to litter-caused issues. Do you have any standout cases in your head, Alex, from your time at the center?
I do. So I think I'll have to categorize my answer into two separate parts. One of patients that I've seen with my own two eyes in person, and then patients that I know about just from the history of the center. Because as you guys know, in outreach, we do a lot of digging through archives of photos and videos that were taken 15, 20 years ago when we're doing stuff like making social media posts, creating content for the website. So I would say one patient affected by litter that I've seen with my own eyes in person was an incredible patient. I forget the exact number, but it was a snapping turtle that had swallowed a fish hook. And so one of the components of providing long-term care and rehabilitating this patient was to do surgery and cut through the plastron of the turtle shell to surgically remove it because it had passed so far within its digestive system that you couldn't go from the front end. You couldn't go from the rear end. So they had to cut in through the side. And I thought that was, it was a moment that kind of stretched what I considered possible, the boundaries of veterinary medicine. I had no idea you could do that because if you've kind of consumed our resources on turtles, you know that turtle shells they're living, growing parts of their bodies. So it was kind of incredible, kind of amazing to imagine cutting through a turtle shell, a live turtle shell, removing that fish hook, reattaching the shell, waiting for it to fuse back together. So that patient in particular was memorable for me for that reason, because it taught me that veterinary medicine can be really complicated. It can be really impressive. A patient that I have seen in the archives of the Wildlife Center, I have no idea what year it was from, but it was a raccoon that had gotten its hand stuck inside of an aluminum can, like a 12-ounce soda can. Amanda, you're nodding like you know which one I'm talking about.
I know that photo.
Yeah, I've seen that picture too.
I've even witnessed that with my own eyes, but I feel like you're right. And that probably outreach people also have this triggered like catalog of like photos and videos in our brains of like, oh yes, I can see it in my mind's eye.
Yeah, and yeah, that one, so a raccoon had gotten its hand stuck inside of the opening of a 12-ounce soda can, and its wrist had been totally cut up really deeply and injured pretty seriously from that sharp metal. And so that one stuck out to me, not that it was particularly gruesome, but that because I can imagine that would hurt a lot for a raccoon who didn't know what was happening, who didn't know that we were trying to help it in our hospital. So that one was kind of, I'd say maybe most memorable of the ones I haven't seen in person, because it just stuck with me for whatever reason.
So to me, we see a number of cases where animals come in due to litter, and some of them are like what Alex was saying. It's that overt litter of like an animal with some appendage stuck in a piece of trash. So it's those, the raccoon with its leg in the can, or an animal with a yogurt container stuck on its head. My favorite story, I think, because this was captured on video, was a skunk with its head stuck in a jar, which obviously was not fun for that skunk, and that's sad. But man, bless the person who found it, braved picking it up, bringing it in because they wanted to get some help. And then our team worked hard to extract that skunk's head from the jar. And there's this great video of one of our technicians like sitting on top of the skunk as it was wrapped in a towel, and one of our vets like very slowly loosening this jar. And the skunk's just spraying the entire time. And like, you can't tell that, but you can see it on video. They're just like, the person holding the skunk is like crying because just like, this is terrible. And just, man, they were dedicated. They got it off. The skunk was fine. He was able to be released. I believe the technician said she did have to throw out those jeans. There was just no salvaging them.
Yeah, I don't know the volume of spray that a skunk can spray before it can't spray anymore, but I bet it reached that limit that day in the hospital.
I feel like you could smell the video practically. But yeah, we see those overt cases of litter, or even like the sad cases too, that I think Maggie references in this episode is when parent birds bring back pieces of litter to the nest, and they're just trying to build a nest and come up with material, but they end up bringing like fishing line or pieces of plastic, and then baby birds end up getting entangled in that as they grow up, which is really sad because it's like nobody wanted that to happen, and the parents are just trying to raise their young, but they happen to bring litter back in.
Well, that's also kind of thinking about that, parent birds bringing back litter as nesting material. You are right, Amanda. I don't think any person in the whole world would want that outcome intentionally. So I think that's a kind of an important part of the takeaway messages, not only of stuff that we heard about in this episode of Untamed, but in all the stories that we talk about in outreach that have to do with litter. Littering doesn't have to be an intentional act to be harmful. Unintentional littering is just as bad, but even though there's no finger to blame to point someone and say, this is your fault, it's something that we all kind of take collective responsibility for.
Right. And the other piece of litter, which kind of like you said too, with that snapping turtle, we see a lot of animals that have ingested fishing hooks. And I think that's for a piece of litter that's ingested by an animal, I think we can probably envision how that happens, right? That's from fishing gear not being cleaned up. But we've also seen some other weird cases of animals ingesting other types of litter. And some of it, you have to wonder how that happened. We had a bald eagle a couple years ago that ingested a beer bottle cap. So that was weird. And then we've also seen a younger bald eagle that had just a ton of trash in its system. It did not make it, and so they did a necropsy, I think. And they found that some of the trash that eagle had ingested were balloon fragments, which is a particular topic of mine that not a fan of balloon releases. But some of those, they may be picking them up as they're scavenging, or maybe since these are eagles, they're eating animals that have ingested litter, and then they in turn, you are what you eat sort of thing.
Right. Yeah.
But the other thing that we know is that bald eagles hang out at landfills sometimes, and maybe that's not a true litter issue because they're picking up stuff at landfills. Maybe that more emphasizes that we should properly dispose of trash, and try and recycle what we can and reduce what we use and not have hazardous waste out at landfills. But I know that through our eagle tracking program, we know that some of the eagles that we have released and some of the eagles that we have rehabilitated and released like to hang out at landfills. And I think you, Alex, are responsible. A couple of your birds that you regularly update are landfill birds, right?
Yes, and so for anybody who has no idea what we're talking about, a little bit of background information. When we say eagles that we track, we mean eagles that were former patients. They were rehabilitated to the point where they could be returned to the wild. Before they were let loose, we worked in conjunction with the Virginia Department of Game and Fisheries to attach GPS tracking units onto these birds, like little backpacks, basically, solar-powered GPS units, so that the Game and Fisheries Department, they are accessing that data and using it for their own research purposes, but they have given the Wildlife Center access to that same information. So what we can do is access the servers where these GPS units are sending information pretty much every day. If there's a good reception, a good signal, it will kind of offload coordinates. And so we can access that information and then analyze it in a software like Google Earth to see a really detailed picture of where that eagle has been. And when I say detailed, I really do mean detailed. It's not just longitude and latitude. It's things like altitude, the wind speed, humidity, all that stuff we have access to. So it's really fascinating to see, because some eagles we see end up traveling hundreds and hundreds of miles each and every year. We've seen eagles go from their release site somewhere in Virginia to as far away as Canada, where they'll spend the season and then migrate all the way back to the precise location where they left in Virginia. And they'll do that same thing, 2 or 3 years in a row. Other birds aren't so mobile. They don't move around. They don't cover quite as much ground. And so one of those would be an eagle that post-release, it was labeled and we refer to now as KG09. KG09 is this eagle, who is an adult male who was released in Virginia, and for the past 3 or 4 years, has spent the vast majority of its time in and around a landfill in Dragonville, Virginia. So that's not really what you might picture when you picture a wild eagle soaring free. You picture like a beautiful mountain stream, maybe on the coast, right, catching fish. This bird is hanging out in a landfill for most of its life post-release. But it's interesting because it makes us think about that tracking information and that data, and it forces us to kind of be detectives a little bit and think about, why is that eagle there? Well, clearly, we know that it is still alive because its tracking points are at different locations each time it checks in. So we know that that eagle is finding what it needs in and around this landfill: space, food, water, and shelter. So I've never been there personally to see it with my own eyes, but I look really, really closely on Google Maps, and right around this landfill are some areas that look to be agricultural fields, some rural communities, but it is, and you can see this information for yourself on wildlifecenter.org under our eagle tracking page. You can see these images that I'm talking about of just crisscross line after crisscross line of movement of this eagle just hanging out in the landfill. So apparently it's a good place for an eagle to be, or at the very least, a place where that eagle can survive, finding its resources. But you're right, Amanda, what you mentioned earlier about litter in landfill, technically that's where litter is supposed to be, in a landfill, right? But we can think about how maybe on an individual basis we can reduce the amount of litter that we produce. We can lower the amount of junk, single-use plastic, whatever, food waste, so that there are less potentially harmful materials for poor old KG09 hanging out in that landfill.
I feel like you need to go to Dragonville landfill just to like see it, because it's like you've spent so many years looking at it on the map, right? Like week after week, and it must be a nice place. And I hope that people do check out the eagle tracking page. I think it's one of the really weird little interesting things that we get to do. And I feel like too, the way that we've divvied it up over the years is that each outreach person will like take a different bird. So just to avoid us having to say like, who wants to do eagle tracking this week? Like we just know like this is my bird and I'll just do it.
Yeah.
So you kind of feel like an attachment to your bird. And it's really funny, like week after week, we do a lot of proofing and editing for each other just to like make sure we're saying coherent words. So like Alex will send me his little blurb things, and it's like week after week, he comes up with these like various exciting ways to say another week at Dragonville landfill. Like, but it's very like, ooh, and we flew, here, and there was a tree and all that. So he like really makes it interesting.
Well, that's what I was saying earlier, is you have to be a little bit of a detective. So maybe this will come in handy for other outreach staff members. One of the things I do when I complete those eagle tracking write-ups and look at the images is I'll look at it on Google Earth so I can see the satellite image, but I'll also look at the same area on Google Maps, which has like local businesses and like historical landmarks and monuments. So I can say things like, oh, did you know like he was right over Domino's Pizza? That's pretty cool. Which maybe isn't as exciting as you think it's going to be, but you got to stretch a little bit when an eagle spends 4 years in a row in an area that's a quarter mile in diameter.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting because, I mean, as you were saying, it's really just an eagle with a backpack hanging out at a landfill far away that you've never been there before, you've never visited, and yet you often are doing this detective work, like you said, and being a detective, but also being a storyteller, right? You find ways to take the activities that this eagle is doing and find ways to make it interesting and to tell a story about a very important issue that we're talking about with this eagle or with whatever's patient that we're speaking about in the context of our conservation work here. And in this episode of Untamed, you spoke about the value of storytelling to inspire behavior change, which is kind of what we're trying to talk about overall with this concept of critters don't need litter. So could you speak a little bit to the storytelling aspect of your job?
Absolutely. This is something, the importance of storytelling and the value of storytelling in education, to me, is paramount. It's probably one of the most important and effective methods of education when it comes to anything, not just wildlife or conservation or environmentalism. The human mind is so hardwired to receive and remember stories that by tapping into that, I think that our messages and what we're trying to get across is received so much better. It's easier to remember. It's also really easy to foster an emotional connection between a subject matter and an audience member when you're using a storytelling method. So that is, to me, just as important, is creating an emotional connection between audiences and subject matters. Because when someone is emotionally invested in something, they are so much more likely to take action. And they're so much more likely to take ownership of an issue if that connection has been made. And storytelling is one of the easiest, most effective ways to do that.
And one of the stories and messages that we talk about a lot and was in this episode was the message of the apple core. And
Yep.
man, this is like a central story and theme of all of our education and outreach programs. And it also became a bit of a joke in season 1 because it did come up like 15 times throughout our 13 episodes. So some of the staff members were like, okay, here we go again, message of the apple core. But obviously when you're talking about litter, we knew that had to be in here. We knew we wanted Alex to talk about it, even though he might be kind of tired of it. Because probably in your time, in your 4 years at the center, you've probably talked about it, like 300 times.
I'm gonna say that's a lowball number. Because thinking about the message of the apple core, it is such a perfect message to share in a story format, because it's relatable, because people feel that they can, at the end of the story, there is something that the listener can do. There's a takeaway message, an action item, I guess, that somebody can do. And it's something that we have been able to connect to education ambassadors, to patients, to anything that right. So in my time at the Wildlife Center, I've probably shared the message of the apple core with in-person audiences, 200 times, 300 times. I've probably shared it 100 times on social media. I've probably shared it 100 times on the website. In so many other different formats. We've got brochures in the lobby at the Wildlife Center that have the message of the apple core. So it's the perfect story. And because it's so perfect, we can share that in lots of different ways. But I kind of started laughing when you said the message of the apple core, because you're right, because this comes up so often, and especially during season 1 of Untamed. That was kind of our running joke, is that it's Untamed season 1, the message of the apple core. And so I am remembering how for filming for this episode, when we're doing the actual filming, kind of behind the scenes, our colleagues from BPM who are there to film will make it kind of a conversational. They'll kind of help you out so that it looks a little more natural on camera. So they'll ask you a question. And Clay asked me, just as a speaking prompt, can you tell us about the message of the apple core? And we had to do a few takes because he knew that I had said the message of the apple core 50 times already for different episodes, for different things. So we had to do a couple takes to get it. But it's a popular story for a reason, because it's a good story to share.
It is. And I guess the thing that always maybe is surprising is that for us who maybe live the message of the apple core and talk about it so frequently, sort of take that message for granted, because how many times have you shared it in person or online or through all these different venues, and people always say, I never thought about that.
Yes, and I think it's interesting that it's a concept and it's a topic that a lot of those same people will say, I never thought of that, but it makes sense. I understand how that could happen. I just never thought of it before. So it's something it's not so difficult to understand. It's a lot of concepts that make a lot of sense. It's just that making the connections down the road for each domino effect to happen. It's something that you're right. A lot of audience members that hear it say, it's kind of like a light bulb turns on. It's like, oh yeah, I never would have thought about that.
Now, Alex, I don't want to take away from your natural storytelling skill. All of us can speak to the fact that you're a very talented storyteller, but sometimes you do have a little bit of assistance, right? Sometimes you do call upon our education ambassadors to help you tell these stories, yeah?
Oh, absolutely. So our education ambassadors are non-releasable, long-term residents at the Wildlife Center that are featured in almost every single one of our education programs in one way or another. If it's not physically there in person for a program, their likeness is being used on a PowerPoint presentation, their stories are being used for other written content. Our education ambassadors are chosen to be on the outreach team because of their stories. That's a really important requirement of the job to be an ambassador. is that their background and their story is one that we are easily able to share with group members to achieve our overall mission as an organization, teaching the world to care about wildlife and to care for the environment. So the education ambassadors, they don't assist me, they are the stars of the show, for sure.
And going back to one thing you said about in these programs when we're delivering various messages to audiences, we always come back to giving people an action item, something actionable they can do to make a difference. And you talked about that in this episode. You had a great quote in there where you're thinking, encouraging viewers to think about how to make a difference, and kind of noting that sometimes in thinking about all these problems in the world and these really big scale issues that we're facing, that really becomes overwhelming and kind of daunting. But just thinking about what you can do, you had such a great quote. I wrote it down so I would get it right. You said, little actions do make a difference. Those small changes in behavior can spread and culminate to have a big impact, which I thought was so great, right? And that's the sort of message we want to give to people.
Yes, it is sometimes quite alarming to take in news about wildlife or the environment. I'm just thinking about all the bad news that you could hear. You know, oil spills in the ocean, huge forest fires, and whatever, anything. It can feel like you're so helpless as an individual. And there's really, I think, an important necessity for everybody who cares about this kind of stuff to maintain a level of optimism and know that the little actions, yep, it's a domino effect. Little actions really do add up. And something that I have been thinking about actually every day since this past World Environment Day, I forget what exact date that was, but outreach educator Lauren, she did a virtual presentation. And on one part of one slide of the whole presentation, she said to live your life when it comes to protecting wildlife and the environment, think, what would happen if everybody acted like me? And I've thought about that every single day since I heard it. And so what would happen if everybody in the world took the time to, while you're walking your dog, just pick up that little candy wrapper that you see on the sidewalk? If everybody did that, well, there wouldn't be any candy wrappers on the sidewalk. So yes, little things add up. All those people all across the world, or small scale in your community, all those people doing little actions, they make a difference. They really do.
I'm curious, Alex, that's a great note, I think, to sort of wrap up this episode of Untamed Unfiltered, but I'm wondering if there's anything that you're planning on doing or that you do every day to kind of help minimize the amount of litter that we're putting out into the world, that you do personally.
So I have decided that my challenge to myself is going to be to pick up other people's litter. If it's intentionally or unintentionally left behind, I feel like I see it a lot. I see takeout food bags like that have blown into a field. I see garbage that has fallen out of a dumpster or something. I am going to take the time to, when I see it, pick up other people's garbage.
What about you, Amanda? Do you have anything?
Oh man, does it have to be different than that? I have not yet, like today especially, I have not yet gone on my dog walk yet. Every day these dogs drag me out of the house, which is good. But I'm thinking particularly this week we're having a ton of rain, really rainy forecast. It's like just going to rain solidly for the next week. And as Alex knows, here in Waynesboro, where our South River, which was also featured in this episode, our South River is prone to flooding at this time of year. And Yeah, I think that we talked about it in this episode of how the watershed systems really tie in. So like that candy wrapper that is right down there at the park and maybe in the floodplain of the river, like that candy wrapper could end up in the Chesapeake Bay because we're in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So perhaps I ought to be very careful and really keep an eye out this week when I'm out walking and pick up other people's trash, which is so, that's so interesting. Like that's such a good action to do, but it's also kind of frustrating, right? Like having to pick up other people's trash, but yet.
Yeah, I agree. It used to, well, I mean, it still does. I get upset. I feel myself get angry and frustrated when I see garbage laying around the road. And I can't tell you how many times I've said out loud, like, that's a shame. Like, who would do that? It makes it all look so ugly. Like, this otherwise would be a really beautiful place. And then, duh, like, I should do something about it. What if everybody acted like me, you know?
That's good. What about you, Aaron?
Well, as you two know, I've been trying to get more into fishing. And recently, this past weekend, I found a beautiful pond that I was doing some fishing at. Not catching anything because I'm bad at fishing, but it's more about being out in nature and enjoying being the solitude, And it was a beautiful day. The sun was coming down. There was frogs everywhere, and the lake, the pond was all calm. As I'm casting, I cast and I get my line wrapped around a tree, which is pretty classic for me. Like I said, I'm not good at fishing. And I'm looking at it and I'm trying to do the yank and I'm trying to pull it down and, whipping it all around. And eventually the line just snaps and it's stuck to this twig with about 3 feet of line and the little lure hanging just right there in the opening. And it's about 6 feet out into this pond. And I'm looking at it and I'm sitting there and there's nobody around. And the part of me says, you can just leave it. Just walk away. Nobody's going to know. You're not going to get in trouble. You can't go get it. There's a part of me that still thinks that snapping turtles are going to bite my toes off if I walk into ponds. So I'm still working through that. But the other part of me, the part of me that, works at the Wildlife Center, the part of me that values nature and protecting the environment, and the part of me that looks at when I'm participating in outdoor recreation, I feel like I need to be just as much a participant as a steward of the land that I am participating on, right? And so just as if I go to somebody's house and I'm a guest at that person's house, I'm not going to throw my trash on the ground and then leave it. When I'm in nature, I'm a guest in nature as well. And so I said, you know what? I need to get that line. So I hiked up my shorts, I strapped my sandals up, and I waded into the murkiest, muckiest, mossiest water I've ever seen. And I didn't see the drop off. So now I'm about mid stomach down and I'm reaching up and I finally grab it and I get the hook down and I wrap it all up and I run back to the shore and I throw it in my tackle box and I say, you know what? I think that's going to call it for the day. So as I'm walking back with my sandals squishing and I'm dripping water from my shorts and I sit down into my poor car, the driver's seat is sopping wet now, I feel good. I feel good about myself because no matter the fact that I didn't catch a fish that day, no matter the fact that nobody would have seen me, whether I left that line there or not, I made the right decision to help leave nature as good or better than I found it, right? And so at the end of the day, that was the decision that I made to help protect the environment that I value so much. And I think that as I continue to, hopefully get better at fishing and spend more time outside in Virginia in these beautiful mountains and forests and streams and ponds and everything that we have here, I want to continue to be a good steward of the land because I think that that's such an important aspect of participating in outdoor recreation.
I just have one question for you, Aaron. Do you still have all 10 of your toes?
I have all 10.
That's a good day.
That's a great day.
Oh, man. Well, thank you guys so much. Thank you for watching out there. We hope that you guys will do something, think of one thing that you can do to make this world and leave this world a better place as well. Thank you, Alex, for being our special guest. I hope that you will think about perhaps doing a long weekend vacation in Dragonville sometime soon, because I feel like you should do that. The time is
Bring
now.
my binoculars. Yeah.
But thank you guys so much. This has been Untamed Unfiltered, and we will see you next week.
Bye, everybody.